You know, there's some building designs that implement features that are not only unique, but seem to fly against the very laws of physics. From buildings perched on cliffsides to houses that look like they're dancing. Join me, I'm counting down 15 of the most unusual architectural designs that defy gravity. Starting with number 15, the Modscape Cliff House. Nothing quite beats an ocean view, but few are willing to go to the lengths taken by the Modscape Cliff House to get it. While just a concept, the idea behind this 5-story ultra-modern home is to secure it by driving a series of steel pins driven into the cliff. These steel pins would hold up 5 stories of a glass home, which would include a top-floor garage and an expansive set of living, dining, and bedroom spaces, with a spa and barbecue being located on the bottom floor. However, likely due to potential longevity issues surrounding the cliff erosion, this concept has really never been put into practice. Number 14, the Timl Pass Museum. So if you're willing to venture high up into the Timl Pass between Italy and Austria, you can visit one of the strangest museums on the planet. Known as the Timl Pass Museum, it's a concrete structure that juts out of a rock face. Internal support ensures that it doesn't collapse, and for those looking to learn more about the area's history, it is worth a visit. However, given the fact that you have to traverse dangerous mountain roads and go on a toll route that costs a whopping €19 one way, getting there certainly ain't cheap. Number 13, the Glass Bottom Pool. While many luxury apartments generally feature gyms, spas, and pools, the glass bottom pool on the rooftop of Market Square Tower in Houston, Texas, takes things to a whole new level. This clear glass pool juts about 3 meters over the edge of the apartment and above the city streets below. And given that there's a 150-meter drop, yeah, the views are pretty incredible. But despite looking dangerous, the 20-centimeter thick plexiglass makes the pool pretty secure. However, if you'd like to go for a swim, you're pretty much out of luck. You gotta get an invitation from one of the building's residents. Number 12, the Hanging Temples of Shan. Now, usually, building on a cliff edge is a pretty bad idea, yet that's exactly where you can find the Hanging Temples of Shan. It's located in northeastern China. This temple complex was built over 1,500 years ago by drilling holes into the cliffside. These holes were then filled with poles, crossbeams, and a support structure within the rock. Now, despite the location, the 40 rooms and accompanying passageways are all apparently quite secure. And it's also worth noting that this complex isn't just for one religion. Instead, there are buildings dedicated to Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism found within it. Yet the reality is that no matter what your religion, a visit here would be pretty incredible. Number 11, the Ketki Pillar. While building on top of a rock pillar may seem a bit sketchy, that's exactly what happened in central Georgia. Known as the Ketki Pillar, it's a 40-meter-tall rocky outcrop that holds a 7th-century-old church. While the choice of location may seem kinda strange, it can be attributed to the practices of the Stylites. These were early Christian ascetics that rejected earthly goods and, of all things, prayed on top of wooden pillars. So to pray on top of this stone pillar was symbolic of that practice. Today, it is still possible to reach the church by using scaffolding and some ladders. However, only monks are allowed to make that climb. Number 10, the Balancing Barn. When you stay at an Airbnb, you'd likely expect a comfortable place with 4 walls and a roof. However, the Balancing Barn is an option for those seeking stranger, more unique living arrangements. A marvel of creative Dutch architecture, this barn is located in Suffolk in southeast England. As its name suggests, this part of the 4-bedroom barn house is suspended above the ground, making it look like it's balancing over the hill below. As an added touch, there's a child's swing attached to its end, allowing those who stay to have a little fun while you're there. Yet the balancing bit isn't the only thing that makes this house interesting. Clad in reflective steel tiles, it comes in at an impressive 30 meters long and provides some exceptional living spaces. Now, I say beautiful because the property is located on the edge of a peaceful nature reserve, and it's home to 6 acres of private gardens, making it absolutely gorgeous. The beauty continues on the interior, too. At one end of the barn, you'll find an exquisite kitchen and dining room with direct access to the grounds. These 2 rooms feature high-quality appliances and are in a contemporary style. This room has large windows on all 3 sides, offering spectacular views of the property. And if you're feeling a bit bookwormy, you can make use of the barn's library, which has plenty of books and great furnishings, such as a music system and wood burner for winter nights. To ensure you get the best sleep here, the beds are fitted with Egyptian cotton sheets and hypoallergenic pillows and duvets, making a stay here a bit more luxurious than precarious. All of the bedrooms also have window views of the outside, allowing you to fully enjoy the property. And when you further consider the unique touches such as bespoke carpets and canvases based on the works of Constable and Gainsborough, it's not hard to see why a stay here is truly incredible. Number 9. Takasugi. Of all the tea houses in Japan, none are quite like Takasugi. Translating to a tea house built too high in English, it's a mix between Salvador Dali-esque art, Dr. Seuss cartoons, and traditional Japanese architecture. In terms of construction, this whimsical house was built atop 2 chestnut trees that were cut from a nearby mountain and transported to the site. Accessible only by freestanding ladders propped against one of the trees, it is an eccentric home with some fun dimensions, and it was built by creative architect Terunobu Fujimori. However, while the building may be fun, Fujimori runs a tight ship. While ascending the ladder, shoes are to be removed halfway up, and once inside, everyone congregates on the bamboo-lined floors for their tea, which is steeped over a wood fire. Now, the inside is quite quaint. After all, it measures only about 2.2 meters on each side. Yet despite the small size, the tea house is still very well loved, and apparently is a great place to visit. It's also worth mentioning that the tea house breaks conventions in Japanese tea house design and traditional architecture. After all, the suspension system is the only one in the world to run cables under its base foundation like a hammock. The house's design also offers views of the outside world as opposed to traditional Japanese tea houses that insulate the guest to concentrate on the tea. In addition, the windows here have another design advantage in that it replaces the traditional picture scroll found in many Japanese houses with the changing nature outside, thereby acting as a piece of living artwork. It is also worth mentioning that while the home follows an old tradition, it's a custom in Japan that tea masters maintain total control over the construction of their tea houses. And as such, Fujimori designed and built the structure for his own use. And while he does let guests in, it is ultimately his own unique piece of tea house history. Number 8. Sky Lodge. Peru is easily one of South America's coolest countries. Between the food, history, culture, and natural beauty, there's so much to see and do here, and chief among those things is visit the ancient city of Cusco. The old capital of the Incan Empire, it's been dubbed the Rome of America, and for good reason. As you walk through the streets, it's not uncommon to see old Incan ruins at various points. And while there are plenty of great hotels in the area, some are a bit more unique than others, and by a long margin. Yeah, I'd say that Sky Lodge is the most incredible of them all. First opened in 2013, the hotel has 3 hanging bedrooms that offer 300-degree views of Peru's Sacred Valley. These hanging bedrooms look like glass pods, and despite being 396 meters in the air, they're equipped with everything you may need for a comfortable stay. Now, in order to get to your room, you'll have to go through a bit of a process. You see, to get to the pods, you either have to get harnessed up and complete a vertical climb using a set of iron rungs, or undergo a challenging hike. Well, while this may sound doable, this task often becomes far more difficult after landing in Cusco. You see, due to the altitude, it's not uncommon for those visiting the city to feel incredibly sick for the first 24 hours. However, once you're up there, you'll be in the lap of luxury. The views are incredible, and at night these pods are said to be very romantic, so long as you don't have a fear of heights. You might be reassured to learn that the pods are very strong, too, supposedly indestructible. Each octagonal capsule is made from aerospace-grade materials that make them secure and weather-resistant. However, at $440 a night, the price ain't cheap, especially by Peruvian standards. For context, it's possible to get a simple yet private, clean, and safe place to stay in Cusco for as little as $25 per night. Yet if you want an experience that's like no other, then you can't go wrong with one of those gravity-defying pods. Moving on to number 7, Habitat 67. 1967 was a big year for Canada. After all, it was the 100th anniversary of the founding of the country, and in order to celebrate, an exposition known as Expo 67 was held in the Canadian city of Montreal. As part of this expo, various new buildings were created, and Habitat 67 is one of the few that was not knocked down or repurposed once the festivities were over. Designed by then master's student Moshe Shafti, it's tied to his thesis titled A Three-Dimensional Modular Building System. The aim of his thesis was simple: how could high-density urban housing be made in a way that felt suburban? The answer was Habitat 67. Now, in essence, this is a housing block made of 345 cubes and rectangular prisms. Each of these has access to the roof of another cube or prism, where a private garden and seating area is located. This gives each apartment its own backyard with a view of the St. Lawrence River, while also giving the whole complex a very futuristic look. By many accounts, this more open structure allowed for more community building, combating the loneliness often felt by apartment dwellers. Yet, despite being more or less universally loved, what was supposed to be a mission to transform urban architecture ultimately failed. The idea really never caught on, and today you'll have trouble finding any other apartments that look like this one. Why, you may ask? Well, despite having an assembly line production process that looked really efficient, the overall cost was a lot higher than originally anticipated. Costs skyrocketed, and in order to make up for the project going over budget, the government made the rent so high that very few people could afford to live there. In time, maintenance issues began to arise. According to one resident who lived there for 3 years more than a decade ago, water had gotten into the concrete and created mold that seeped into the ventilation system. When coupled with the economic downturn that would come during the 1970s, the money and interest for innovative projects like this simply dried up. However, the future that it offered, the hope that middle-class homeowners could live in a structure like Habitat 67 instead of fleeing to the suburbs, was a noble one. And while this dream may have more or less died, at the very least, architect Safdie was able to benefit from his attempt. Habitat 67 gave him an international acclaim, and to date he's designed over 75 buildings around the world. And furthermore, as cities continue to evolve, perhaps his ideas will one day be brought back to the forefront. However, whether or not that will actually happen is still unclear. Number 6. The Drina River House. Now, by the looks of it, the Drina River House is the type of dwelling that seems like it's about to topple over into the river below. And unfortunately, it has, 7 times to be exact. Yet the house continues to be reconstructed, and the reasons for this are not what you may think. Located on Serbia's Drina River close to the border with Bosnia, this house sits atop a rock and a set of stilts that makes it jut out above water level. This puts the river house in a stunning yet very precarious position, and its history shows that it's far from safe. You see, the rock that the Drina River House stands on used to be a resting place. More specifically, it was commonly used by swimmers as a place to stop between either continuing to swim across to the other side or as a marker to return back to the bank from which they came. However, in 1968, the rock changed forever when a group of local boys created a river house on it as a fun summer project. However, by the fall, the river had washed away their simple wooden cabin. Despite this high water, ever since the locals have worked together to make sure that the Drina River always has a wood cabin on it. While this has been a lot of work, after all, the current rendition, which was built in 2011, is the 7th river house to have been built here. Most people would say it has been worth it. Now, the actual stone that the Drina River House stands on is subject of an old folk legend. The story goes that a medieval hero was traveling through the area and wanted to cross the river to reach the other side. However, he didn't want his horse to step into the deep water. So to prevent this from happening, the hero climbed onto a lookout and threw a large boulder into the river. The boulder plopped down at the center of the river, allowing the man and his horse to hop onto it from one side of the river and then to hop off of it to the other. Well, according to that legend, the marks of the horse are still visible on the rock, and apparently lending some credibility to the fascinating folktale. Number 5. The Dancing House. So by all accounts, Prague is a beautiful and historic city. The capital of Czechia, it's home to countless buildings dating back hundreds of years, and as such, the architecture here remained untouched for centuries. However, after Prague was bombed by the Allies in World War II, parts of its historic center were decimated. One such place was an old apartment block. Now, for decades, it looked like the apartment block would be left to rot. After all, it was untouched until 1960. At that point, the land was cleared, leaving the spot empty for decades. However, it wouldn't be empty forever. In 1986, an owner of a neighboring hotel by the name of Vlado Milinek brought up the possibility of putting up a new building to landowner Václav Havel. And while nothing happened immediately, Havel, in a stroke of fortune, ended up becoming increasingly famous. In fact, he was elected the president of Czechia in 1992. It was also in this year that he decided that he wanted his land to be a symbol of a new future for Czechia, and so he decided to build the Dancing House. The project was headed by both Milinek and the highly acclaimed Canadian-American architect Frank Gehry, and it was completed in 1996. What they ultimately created was a building that, despite using classical materials, kind of looks like it's moving. Considered to be part of the deconstructivist style, the two managed to pull off this design by splitting the building into two parts. The curved, dancing part of the structure is essentially a glass tower that narrows at half its height and is supported by curved pillars. The tower is then covered by 99 concrete panels of varying shapes and dimensions in order to give the building its unique shape, while still blending into the rest of the building. The second part of the dancing tower, however, is more static in shape, and it really only stands apart thanks to the curved molding and unaligned windows. In tandem, it's those features that led to the building not only appearing on a series of gold 2000 Czech koruna coins, but also were fundamental in giving it its symbolic meaning. That's because, according to Milenik, the design's transition from static to dynamic is meant to represent Czechia's transition. As a result, it goes without saying that the Dancing House has become one of Prague's most iconic buildings. The style, shape, heavy asymmetry, and materials are also considered out of place by some critics and civilians. However, the reality is that this hasn't stopped tourists and locals alike from flocking to this structure. Number 4. One Central Park. So when you think of a modern skyscraper, a super tall building made out of steel and glass is probably what comes to your mind. However, One Central Park reimagines what this type of building can be by being very green, and I'm not talking about paint color. Located in Sydney, Australia, this is a multi-use high-rise that's made with eco-friendliness in mind. One of its most obvious green features are its hanging gardens. Covering a length of over 50 meters, there are a total of 23 so-called green walls on the building. They're comprised of over 350 species of flowers and plants, but they stand apart for not just being varied, but large. After all, they're the world's longest vertical gardens. They're also some of the most high-tech. After all, instead of using soil, the plants grow using a mix of light, carbon dioxide, water, and nutrients that are dispersed mechanically. In order to assist in this process, One Central Park feeds many of the plants sunlight with the help of cantilevered heliostat on the 28th floor. It's this heliostat that gives One Central Park a spot on this list. In terms of form, it's incredible, a gravity-defying structure jutting out 40 meters from the side of the skyscraper on the 28th floor. It's got a balcony up top, however, it's the bottom side that brings in its function. Now, the heliostat's there to solve a shade problem. More specifically, due to surrounding buildings, some plants on the building's terraces, atrium, and podium spaces don't get enough light. What the heliostat does is direct natural light to these otherwise dark spaces. In order to pull this off, it uses a series of motorized mirrors that are positioned 100 meters below the cantilever on the rooftop. When the light reaches the cantilever, its 220 fixed reflecting panels bounce light off the appropriate parts of the building, keeping the plants well nourished. So it is clear that One Central Park is far and away one of the most eco-friendly buildings on this list, and I hope that some of its technology become more mainstream in the years to come. Number 3. Vloibergtoren. By any stretch of the imagination, Vloibergtoren is strange. Built in 2015, it replaced a wooden lookout tower that was well loved by locals. You see, before 2015, people would come there to take in a view of the town. However, in an unfortunate turn of events, vandals set the tower on fire, destroying it in the process. Since the old tower was made of wood, the thought behind the new one was that it would have to be both metal and vandal-proof. In addition to this caveat, there also seemed to be a desire to make something a bit more creative in the old tower's place, and the end result was a seemingly gravity-defying staircase. Designed by the Belgian engineering firm Close to Bone, the top platform of the staircase tower offers a view of the town and nearby forest. It's been called both the Stairway to Nowhere by its haters and the Stairway to Heaven by its fans, and the whole thing is pretty sizable. After all, it weighs 12 tons, and the platform is 11.3 meters off the ground, despite there being nothing underneath it to support it. In fact, only the very bottom platform of the staircase is on the ground, and this leaves us with an obvious question: how is that possible? Well, we gotta take a closer look at the bottom portion. According to reports, it's far heavier and stronger than the rest of the platforms, thereby helping to keep everything in place. The steel of the walls is also galvanized to prevent any corrosion and covered with weathering steel to protect it from the elements. And as a fun twist, the steel even has the same rusty color as local ironstone, with this being a nod to the area's history. But in any case, it's this system of support acting together that keeps the staircase from sagging or tipping. As you might imagine, this interesting design has fascinated people from around the world. This has led to not only tourists, but also the media taking notice. After all, the staircase appeared on a Belgian TV show called Call Boys for several scenes between 2016 and 2019. However, this staircase has also attracted the wrong sort of crowd. Unfazed by the new tower's lack of wood, on June 29, 2018, vandals attacked it by way of an explosion. While the explosion did cause some damage, thankfully the base structure was left untouched. This in turn allowed for renovations to go ahead without too much difficulty, and at the time of publishing this video, the staircase is now fully completed and open to the public. Number 2. The Dynamic Tower. Unfortunately, the Dynamic Tower was never built. However, had it been constructed, it could have completely revolutionized the way we create skyscrapers. Now, generally speaking, most buildings stay in one place, and that's for good reason. After all, any amount of unnecessary movement could cause it to lose balance and topple over. However, the Dynamic Tower was supposed to be different. That's because it was designed to purposefully move from side to side. Now, this 420-meter tall building was designed back in the mid-2000s, with the idea being that it would be an 80-floor apartment block with moving floors. These would spin 360 degrees around a central elevator at the axis. The plan was for the tower to move about 6 meters per second, giving everyone inside a chance to see different views of Dubai, depending on the time of day. It was also slated to be the world's first prefabricated skyscraper. After all, it was alleged that about 90% of the tower could be built in a factory and shipped to the construction site. More specifically, each floor would consist of 40 factory-built modules that could be assembled on site, making the entire process pretty easy. There were also some high-flying claims about cost savings. According to David Fisher, the tower's prefabricated portions would decrease the project's cost. The kitchen and the bathroom fixtures would be pre-installed, and the tower's core would serve each floor with a special patented connection for clean water based on technology to refuel airplanes mid-flight. In addition to those incredible innovations, the tower was supposed to be very green. That's because the hope was that it would be powered entirely from wind turbines and solar panels, with the wind turbines being located in between the rotating floors and the solar panels on the top of each floor. In fact, the plan was that this would be so effective that surplus electricity would be produced, so much in fact that there would be enough to power 5 other similar-sized buildings in the vicinity. Well, however, the unfortunate reality is that this design seemed to overpromise and underdeliver. First and foremost, ground was supposed to be broken in 2008. However, the global financial crisis prevented backers from putting any money into the project. To make matters worse, according to some reports, the tower's designer had actually never built a skyscraper before, and during his career had mainly worked as an academic rather than a practitioner. This in turn decreased confidence in the project. So, despite all the hype and media coverage, the design was never built. However, practical or not, it still was pretty gravity-defying. Number 1. The Leaning Tower of Pisa. I mean, come on, of all the buildings on this list, the one that holds the title of being the oldest and most famous is none other than the Leaning Tower of Pisa. In many ways, it's the original gravity-defying structure, and what sets it apart from most others on this list is that its gravity defiance is not a feature, but an accident. The tower traces its origins back to 1172. In that year, construction began after a donation of 60 gold coins was made by a widow named Lady Berta di Bernardo. There is some disagreement as to who the tower's architect was. However, in any case, they didn't do a great job, as the design was flawed from the start. Since the tower was built in an area with soil composed of clay, fine sand, and shells, the tower needed a very deep foundation in order to stay upright. However, in what can only be described as a disastrous mistake, the foundation of the building was just 3 meters deep. This was woefully insufficient when work began on the second floor. It began to very clearly sink and lean. While the tower would lean for centuries, things became much worse when in 1838, an architect decided that Pisa would benefit from exposing the base of the tower. This is because it was mostly buried underground and had a lot of intricate artwork that wasn't visible. However, as they began to dig, water came spouting out of the ground, causing the tower to tilt even more. This put it in even greater danger of falling. Things remained relatively stable until the Mussolini years. In 1934, Il Duce, in a spurt of idiocy, decided that the Leaning Tower was an inappropriate symbol for a masculine fascist Italy. He believed that it should be straightened, and so in an attempt to reverse the tilt, engineers drilled holes into the foundation of the tower and poured in about 200 tons of concrete. That proved to be an unmitigated disaster, as all it did was make the tower lean even more. 2 further attempts to fix the tilt, 1964 and 1985, just led to even more leaning, and by the late 1980s, it seemed like the Leaning Tower was at imminent risk of collapse. In 1990, they closed the tower off to the public, and in 92 attempted to temporarily stabilize the building. They did so by building plastic-coated steel tendons around the tower up to the second story, keeping it in place so more work could be done. While initial attempts actually made the tilt worse, in '99, engineers came up with an ingenious system. By extracting the soil at a very slow pace, generally no more than 4 to 8 liters per day, and using a massive cable harness to hold the tower in place, they were able to install the underground cables without damaging the tower. The results were incredible. Within 6 months, the tilt had been reduced by over 2.5 centimeters, and by the end of 2000, about 30 centimeters. By the time the tower was reopened to the public in December of 2001, a 45-centimeter reduction had been achieved, returning the tower to its 1838 position. Experts believe that this essentially saved the tower, and these efforts should be enough to keep it in place for at least the next 200 years. However, given the fact that it's still sinking by a rate of about 1 millimeter annually, its lean is getting worse every single year. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.